Türen schließen sich und ich möchte jetzt vorstellen Chris Teachout aus den USA, aus Iowa eingeflogen. Und hier ist der deutsche Titel: Denken Sie um und ändern Sie Ihren Boden. Das ist natürlich ein sehr, sehr großer Auftrag und der eigentliche Titel heißt auf Englisch Soil Regeneration Change Your Mind, Change Your Soil. Also nicht Soul, sondern Change Your Soil. And I'm very happy to introduce you, Chris. Nice to come to Germany, especially very good for me to know because our ancestors, they've got some similarities. Yes. Your original name was not Teachout, but it comes from the Netherlands, from North Frisia.
Yep.
And it was pronounced Teachout.
Teachout.
Yep. So was the same like me with my ancestors, with Marx, was not Karl Marx, but with KS. And, you know, changing your directions in the universe, in the world, in the soil, sometimes makes a difference. So you change your mind, and it's important always to think of the mindset that you have. Es kommt einfach darauf an, mit welcher Einstellung man an den Boden rangeht. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Greetings from the United States, from Iowa. And I'll try to talk slowly so then you can understand, help you understand. And my title slide here is, the biggest problem that we have in agriculture is right between here, between our ears. That's the biggest issue that we have. So when we can change this up here or start to change that thinking, we can make these improvements and make the changes. When I was raising up our children, one of the biggest things that I did, my biggest goal was to make them think. So I would give them problems, and I'd give them the facts they need to solve the problem, but I'd also throw other things at them too. So they had to sort it out and figure out things. Because we know in this world, everything that is given to us, all the information, some of it is not true, some is true. So you got to really use your mind to pull these things out. So I'm going to be talking about kind of my journey and where I've been and kind of what I do for soil health and for rebuilding our soil. Because one of my mindsets is I always question everything. Not to be negative about it, but it's like, okay, is this the truth? Or where is the truth coming from? Or where are these facts coming from? So I just want to show you what we're doing on our farm in the States. And, if it implants a little seed, in your head to where maybe I can, you can't do exactly what I'm doing, but if there's one little part or one little seed that I can plant, that's my goal. Okay. And so soil health is also referred to as soil quality. It is defined by the continued capacity of the soil to function as a living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So a lot of times we start out with the soil quality, and the biggest new term is soil health. When we talk about health, only living things can be healthy. So a lot of times when we look at soil, we think of it as just inert matter. I mean, that was kind of, a lot of people refer to it as dirt. Well, I refer to it as soil because there's a lot of living matter in there. And we've kind of lost that. When we've come through the green revolution, we've lost a lot of that information of the living soil. Okay. And here's the history of my change. I started in 1979. That's when I started my farming career. In 1982, we did aerial helicopter seeding of cereal rye into standing corn. Late summer, it was when the corn was at tassel. And I was doing that not because of the cover crop or soil health, is I had a beef cow herd. And I wanted winter forage when we were grazing the corn residue. And so that's where I kind of started into this. In 1991, we began to no-till corn into soybean residue. In 1994, we began no-till of soybeans. And then in 2012, a light bulb moment on the cover crops. I started hearing about cover crops and what they do to the soil. And the light bulb went off that I had been doing this back in the 80s. You know, the cereal rye in there. We were mob grazing, cereal rye and then planting a cash crop. You know, we'd run the cow herd over there in a tight mob over that. We were doing some of these things back then, but we got away from it. And part of the reason we got away from it, we were raising our own rye and harvesting that cereal grain, mainly for the bedding, for the straw. And we loved rye because it had a lot of tonnage and a lot of coarse straw for the livestock. We got away from that because that was a harvest that we had to do in the summer, and we were busy with other things in the summertime. Then pretty soon, the machinery, the balers and the harvesters become really efficient of baling corn stalks, corn stover. And so we started baling out corn stover and using that for bedding. So we got away from the cool season plants. And then we thought we were really smart because the balers, I had a large square baler that would really compact the corn stalks. And then we started to sell our carbon off. Big mistake. We were exporting our carbon. We weren't putting that back in the soil. So that was part of the aha moments there. And then once I got back into it, in 2014, probably on 90% plus of our acres, we have cover crops on that. And 2018, by gathering myself, and one of the biggest things when you're doing this change, you need support. You need a local group around you of that same mindset, because other people will come after you and wanting you to fail. Because in farming, what you're doing is out there for everybody to see, unless it's hid back over the hill. But now with drones and everything, everything's very visible. So you have to have that support network close by, and then also as a group, a larger group, then you expand your territory and bring people together. And then now I also belong to an international peer group that from all over the world we're discussing and bringing our problems, our issues together to help each other. Because when we have a crazy idea of what I want to do, we can bounce it off all these different groups and help you go forward. Or some person has tried that and says, no, that fails. Here's how you need to change that. Again, changing your mind. Anyway, here is kind of the 5 tenets of soil health. These aren't mine. These are what everybody's kind of the key points for soil health. And, number 1 is a soil armor. We're covering that soil much of the year as possible. We try to minimize the soil disturbance. We don't want to break up the soil structure. And I'll be showing you how my farm has changed that way. We're trying to do plant diversity. When we go back, our soils in the United States where I live were once prairie soils, over 150 years ago. So we're in all this aspect, you look at nature and what nature does and try to implement that on your farm. And nature, when we look in the woods or a native prairie, there is a diverse community of plants working together. These trees out here, how big they are. Has anybody fertilized those? No, this system has fertilized that. And the amount of tonnage that is out there in growth is just tremendous with no added inputs. So we have to mimic nature and how it works, and then take that, how can I work that into my farm? And we want to have a continual live plant root as much as possible through the years. And through the year. And I'm from my region in the Midwest, we're mainly corn and soybeans. Well, corn and soybeans, you've got a warm season legume and a warm season grass, only growing for about 4.5 months of the year. What are we doing the rest part of the year for our soils? Most time, nothing. We've got away from that. And then, finally, to top all this off, is if we can bring livestock integration. In a lot of places, the livestock has gone to confinement units, and we took out fence rows and took out all the fences, so a lot of times we don't have livestock around anymore for those fields. I grew up having livestock, and we had a cow-calf herd clear up to, I think, 2003. But as the kids got graduated off, my qualified help left and went to college, and so I don't have that labor force, to help take care of the livestock. But after I got into the soil health movement, and I'll show on some of my slides, the below ground livestock is what I'm really focused on and what I need to do to take care of that. Anyway, the first one here is to armor your soil. Next slide. She's doing that. I'm doing the English version of here. Okay. So we armor your soil, and this is a field of soybeans planted into cereal rye. And when we look at that, if you look at this up here, this is a different variety. This rolled down really nice. This stood up more. This was the hybrid rye. This is an old conventional rye. The hybrid rye doesn't get as tall, and it wouldn't roll crimp. The old varieties, they get up and they'll crimp over a lot better. Okay, next. Anyway, this is a field of soybeans in the rye. We planted, and the rye was probably about that tall. And we terminated that with glyphosate. A lot of times by doing this, we're eliminating a lot of our pre-herbicides and being able to even reduce some of the glyphosate use. And kind of why are we doing this? Why are we arming the soil? Okay, next. Here is, this was taken, the one probe that's in the ground says 26 centigrade, and then the one next to it, 32 centigrade. That's under that map. This was taken at the end of June, the day we'd had about a week-long period of very high temperatures. And so I wanted to see what the soil was telling me. The microbial activity in the soil quits at about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the one in the ground right there is at the 4-inch level. So 79 degrees, 26 Celsius, we're still having biological activity going on. This here, the 90 degrees or the 32, that is on the surface underneath that rye. So we're still staying pretty, not too bad. So we're eliminating, loss of water and the impact of raindrops. Go to the next. This is right next to it. And I call this is a lot of times we purposely do check strap strips, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes the driver missed a spot, and so we have a test. And so what we did here, and this is only just a few meters away from that last test, taking the same time, and it's showing that we have 93 degrees there at the 4-inch level. But look at this temperature here on the bare soil. We're shutting down the microbial activity. We don't have biological activity to produce some, release some of the nutrients to our crop. Our crop's going to shut down too. It's going to protect itself. So that's why we're trying to armor the soil. Okay, next. I guess I jumped somewhere. Okay. Here is this is a direct seeded soybeans into corn stubble, and this is a no-till. And no-till, we've been doing it for a long time, and it looks good. But here's the problem: I've got my soil, and this was on yields about 190 bushel per acre, so we have a lot of residue. But come the next spring, that residue is being consumed up with the biology and the earthworms. Even on my corn acres, by midsummer, I do not have the residue left in between the rows because I have this underground livestock that I'm feeding. And when I'm feeding them, the earthworms will come up and they start pulling that down, take that carbon down in the soil. Then pretty soon I don't have that armor on there. So it's kind of like having a feedlot full of cattle. Say I have 100 head in there. And I've been feeding a ration to them. I get another 50 put in there. If I keep just feeding that same ration, what's going to happen? They're going to go backwards. They're going to starve. So now that I build my biology up and my earthworms, I have to layer effects and add more to this. And I'm not going to add it with fertilizer. I'm going to add it with plants and covers. Next. This is soybeans planted into the same corn stalks, but we spring seeded. We had oats, barley, some flax phacelia, some mustards. We only grew it for about 30, 40 days. It gets the biology really cranking in that soil. Then we planted the soybeans in there and we terminated that. So that's for guys that if we didn't get a cover crop planted like a winter cereal grain the fall before, this is a kind of fallback that we can do. Okay, next. Then here is what I really like. We're planting into rye up to my chin, and we're rolling it down. Another thing what we're doing is moving our planting date of the soybeans up. Normally they're a May planted crop. We moved it up into April. And we planted into the rye when it's about knee-high. We let the soybeans and the rye grow together for almost a month. Now, by doing this, I'm going against our insurance policy, our crop insurance policy. They're telling us we have to terminate at the time of planting. So now we're having to work with the government and with the risk management agency to get this practice approved. But by moving this up, we've gained 6 to 8 bushel per acre, a large increase. This is a friend of mine, and he is in North Carolina. And if you saw that soil underneath that, he's planting into very heavy covers and has a real nice corn crop. He's got that fully covered. He didn't swipe that away. He just planted direct into that. No trash wipers on there. But that soil under there, well, he won the state championship with this corn, went over 300 bushel per acre for North Carolina. That soil in there when I went down and visited his farm, it looks like the clay tiles on these roofs. It's that orange. And to me, that's, for a Midwestern soil, it looked like that was just terrible. But here's what he can do. And he's a first-generation farmer. So he doesn't have the garbage that I grew up with to change. And sometimes it's hard when generations pass knowledge down, but a lot of times it skips a generation. If we kind of go back to the way my grandfather did things, he did rotations. He had livestock. He kept it covered. I mean, it is what they did. They had longer-term rotations. Now it's corn, soybeans, or corn, and we've got away from this. So here's how we can, start to do things. By having that armor on there, when we have our rainfall events, the weather is changing, and instead of a 1-inch or 2-inch rainfall event, we have a 3 or 4-inch rainfall event. The events are being more intense and more concentrated. So the weather has changed. So coming off that field and off the slopes, that water is not taking any soil or any nutrients. Today we've been talking about the nitrogen and phosphorus, and looking at the slides, and what everybody's concerned with is our nitrates and the phosphorus loading in our water systems. So this is where I want to be before we get heavily regulated on what we can and cannot do. I want to know what I can do before they tell me what I have to do. And reducing of the nutrient put. On this farm, I went out there. We had a 3-4 inch rainfall event. So I go out there as soon as it quit. I took this picture, and with all this system on there, we have so much better infiltration of the water. So out of that 3-4 inch rainfall event, maybe we got 2.5 inches into the soil. Next to it, this is coming off the neighboring field. Right next to that, there's phosphorus, there's nitrates, there's soil in there. And it's the topsoil. It's the most valuable stuff. It's going down, going into the rivers. Our rivers got muddy by all this. Another thing, by having the protection here of the armor of the soil, this shows a little, we did not have a cereal rye crop on this. And here we have some, weeds that broke through. On the reduced chemicals that we're putting on, well, it wasn't enough for this little section. And so it also, the cover helps on our chemical program, lowering that. It helps on our weed species. It really eliminates, you've probably heard in the United States, the, water hemp, Roundup Ready, or it's Roundup resistant, glyphosate resistant. This isn't here, but it's becoming rampant because we've abused that tool of glyphosate. It's made farmers really lazy, where we do glyphosate, and forget about all the other chemistry. And when we do that, when you keep doing it, kind of one of the word pictures is if a carpenter has his toolbox and say glyphosate is a hammer. Well, a hammer does a really good job of building things, but it can also be dangerous used improperly. Now, if you take that hammer away and tell a carpenter to build something, he's at a loss. So even glyphosate, used properly, and on our farm by rotating different chemicals and not using it just every year, every time, we try to rotate those just like our crop rotation. Then we still have a very effective tool in the toolbox. Okay. Anyway, this is planting into some of the cereal rye. Like I say, this is kind of normal planting time about the second week of May, and that rye is getting up, about to my chin. The first time you do this, You need some rye whiskey before you do this. The first time, little stuff, and then you get into the big stuff. But this is so fun. I mean, once you get the confidence and support of others helping you in how to do it. And in the background there, you see, is our farmstead up here. We have a lot of timber edges. There's a small stream through here. And this was some strip trials that we do and some replicated trials. And that was some of the spring-seeded cover crops. And we have this on-farm network in Iowa called the Practical Farmers of Iowa. It was started 28 years ago. So like an organization like this is trying to build your numbers. It's up to over 3,000 members, but it's been going for about 28 years. And the basis of it is farmer-driven research. So when we do these trials, we as farmers come up, what do we want to try? Because the universities are normally 5-6 years behind what we're doing. And then, where does the money come from to run those trials a lot of times? And we know where a lot of that money comes from. But this way, it's farmer-driven. We try to do these replicated trials, random and replicated, so we get some valid scientific data on this. And it's farmer-driven, and we publish them. So if you go to the Practical Farmers Iowa, you can look up for years and years all the tests that have been farmer-driven. Yeah, just another view, planting through that. Okay, next. And then here's kind of a split shot to where there's two different ways when you're planting into cover crops. Either do it green and then terminate, or terminate and wait 2-3 weeks to where it's crispy brown. You don't want to terminate and then say if you get rained out and try to plant into there when that is dying down, it's a nightmare. Because when that plant is dying down, it is so tough. You'll have hairpinning, you'll have wrapping issues, a lot of problems. So it's either go ahead, and I like the planting green, but there's two ways of doing that. This is a picture of that rainfall event. This is looking across the road from my field. This is where that chocolate water was coming off the field. This field has been no-tilled for about 15 years. And it has terrace structures on there. And we're still, what he has is the infiltration isn't there. And he doesn't have the biology there to help make the soil function as it should be. Anyway, you have to get out and do some root digs and some pits. And we were doing this, a friend of mine, he came over and we dug some holes, and we had a field day this summer. And get down and really observe. And, when you observe something and you try some different things, even trying it on a hectare or something, try something. Or, everybody, if you go out and try to do a strip trial, a lot of times you don't know the questions to ask ahead of. A lot of times my analogy is ready, shoot, aim. And normally everybody it's ready, aim, shoot. If you're getting the gun. My analogy with that is, okay, if you're going on a bear hunt and you get a new gun and go on the bear hunt and the bear's coming at you and you shoot and it's shooting over here, big problem. So when we do experimentation, we get ready, we shoot it, but okay, it's shooting over here. Then we dial it in, we bring it in. Then we can ask the questions, or then we can set up trials to figure out what we want to know from this. So it's all in the power of observation. This is the soybeans coming through that deep mulch. And there's a lot of predators in there. And it just keeps the moisture that we have when it turns hot and dry in the summer, in June and July. And the soybeans just act totally different growing in this. Okay, next. Here is, when we started doing the covers, it started to change the physiology of the soybean plant and the rooting of that. Since we have real healthy soils and have a good earthworm population, our roots are going down 3-4 foot. And we're having, under this layer of mulch between the rows they're 30-inch rows, and we have roots going sideways through that whole soil profile. Next. And here is what I want to show you, what normally, in a normal practice, the roots go down, and about a 30-degree angle, they go down. And then if there's tillage, you normally have a tillage layer that kind of stops them. So out of this soil profile here, the access of the roots, they're missing all this and all this. So if you've broadcast or have some fertility in your soil, you're losing out of that. By having this covered and having the earthworm channels go way down and a real good structured soil, my roots are going down 3-4 foot. They're going crossways. We had, in that picture, we had soybean roots that were going sideways, and then they went up. Have you ever seen a root, start to go back up? Because it was in a favorable environment. It was keeping it nice and cool to where it could access all the nutrients. So I'm capturing the whole profile there. It's a lot more efficient system. Yeah, and this is kind of showing it. We broke off the bottom roots. But anyway, these were going very lateral. And here it's showing some of them going extremely deep down in the soils. And what we're getting, a lot of times nodulation, a lot of people look at the nodulation around the roots. But if it's really good, you want nodulation on the lateral branching. And we have seen a lot of nodules out in that, clear out to the center of the row. So we're maximizing the use of the natural system to bring nutrients into this. Next. Then we go to plant diversity. And that one picture that showed this background before, we have the edges along the timber. And when we do a profitability map with all our GPS mapping, and if we lay this out on the farm, those areas next to the woods here, the first few rows, hardly yield anything. So why are we doing that? Yeah, we could go and clear all that out, but I want this biodiversity. And so what we're doing with this, instead of putting all our inputs on that and losing money every year, which is insanity, so what we do, this is a 35-way mix, 35 different species in here, and a lot of them are pollinators, and they're all annuals. And so we only did a 30-foot wide strip, and we went next to the timber edges or different parts of the farm. Why we do this? Because we want to bring the pollinators in. This is kind of like the pre-dinner party. We're serving the drinks and the nectar, and we're feeding them the pollen, the appetizers, so we're getting them all ready and built up. Because then in my soybean crop, if we have aphids come in, guess what? I've got all these guys all partied up. They're ready to go to town and have dinner on the aphids. And the ratio of this, by doing this, we do about 1 acre of this per 80 acres. And research has shown that by doing this next to the soybeans the yields will go up 7-8%. Just by doing this very simple practice. Some people, and the government has a program to put perennial flowers and perennial grass around strips like this. This only cost me about $27 an acre, plus the land charge and the equipment to run across it. If we go the way the government wants to do these perennial strips, it'll cost from $400 to $900 an acre for that. Yeah, there's some cost share on that, but then you're limited. If you have livestock that you want to graze, you can't graze that. This, I can do it more often and rotate it around the farm, different areas of low production, and that's how I can bring this in, bring that diversity. And here's what the seed mixture looks like. And that just is almost like a painting to me with all the different colored seeds in there. And when I take people out into this, I'd always tell them to shh, quiet. And there was buzzing going on, and there were insects in there that I'd never seen around the farm before. And so we planted it, and they came. They showed up. Yeah, this is kind of an aerial view of our farm. And like I say, some of these strips along the edge there, or along the edge there, we'll put those pollinator strips in. Because we've got this, we've got riparian areas here. We've planted trees along here to act as a big buffer. But then we put these unprofitable areas along the timber, and we'll put those into it. So we're real rolling, contoured land. Then, yeah, here's just another one of the insects that are showing up there. And one thing, you know, the phacelia, I really like that. We put in like 3 different types of mustards because they bloom at different periods of time to extend this. Then we started back into some small grains. Like I say, most everybody is corn and soybeans, but now raising my own cover crop seed. And this is oats and barley together. Because if we do a cover crop in the fall of oats, straight oats, and this came from Dave Brandt, if you just plant straight oats and you get a real good fall that they grow really good, and then when they winter kill, they'll go over and it's like, you know, cardboard or paper over the soil. It really seals the soil off. So if we put 20 to 30% of barley in there, it has more lignin early. You'll create some structure where it won't go totally flat. So why buy or raise 2 different fields when I'm using this strictly as cover crops? So we blended the seeds together, and as time goes along, keeping this same mix, it will kind of self-balance to my farm, you know, the ratios on that. And this is, we're doing cereal rye. We harvest some cereal rye, and we try to spread the residue out there. And this gives us an opportunity to come back in and go along the diversity. Because after corn and soybeans, a lot of times late in the season, we're very limited what we could plant as a cover crop, mainly, you know, the winter cereals. But after we do this, we have that whole long summer period that then we can go with a multi-species. Then you get the big radish and the turnips and mustards and just a whole balance, and it really changes the soil, you know, after the rye. And this is kind of a mix, and we're always experimenting with different mixes and throwing sunflowers in that. Why do we throw, you know, different plants do different things with their roots. And this is what science is really starting to gear up and trying to find out. The sunflowers have a deep taproot. They'll go down and they'll bring up zinc. So if you have zinc deficient soils, a lot of times there's zinc way down deep. So sunflowers will bring that up. And it's the exudates off of their roots that release some of these nutrients. Buckwheat, it'll go down and release phosphorus and bring phosphorus up into the system. So combination of these plants and the different relationships, when planted together, they're just very effective. And when we look at that crop, we don't have volunteer grasses, and we don't have any other weeds come up there. when we have that, even with this, some of the sparse population there. And then, like, we're doing strip trials of some different mixes across there. So always trying different things. Next. Here's one when we talk about limitations and what's regulation that can come on us. We in the States are not regulated on nitrogen or phosphorus yet. It's getting closer. And so I want to know what I can do on my farm to reduce the nitrogen rates. I've already pretty much weaned myself off of phosphorus and potassium additions to the farm. With the multi-species cover crop, we're tapping into old reserves and bringing that up. And my soil test levels, they aren't depleting like they said. I'm mining the soil. No, the soil is building it up. So now my next step is the nitrogen. How can I reduce my nitrogen rates way down? And when I've had corn, after we've had a real healthy soil of like several years of the cover crops, then maybe that one year of small grains followed with a multi-species cover crop, we're down to a half rate of nitrogen application. And our yields are going up. My average 10-year history on corn is 187 bushel per acre. This year, on some of that ground that we only put a half rate, we only put 100 pounds. Normally in our area, it's 1.1 to 1.2 pounds per expected bushel per acre. So a lot of guys are putting 160 to 180 to even over 200 units of nitrogen per acre. I only put 100 units of nitrogen on. And that cornfield, after that system, you can't just start out from year one and expect this. We got 216 bushel per acre off that on a half rate. But we've got the biology and we've got the soil structure to do this. So then I go with my test here. We wanted to go low nitrogen. And since I always want to try extremes, we took about 5 acres. I was like, we only put, it's less than a 25% rate of nitrogen on this field. That's just extremely low. And so we started doing different trials in here. Each one of these was planted when the corn's about at 3 leaf stage. And so we're just offset planting that. We've got about a 6-way mix of some cool season plants in there too. But I wanted to see what warm season legume would possibly share, because we've got a real good mycorrhizal colony and the mycorrhizal fungal threads. And so we're trying to see if we can share that nitrogen to the corn crop. So we tried a lot of different things. We tried mung bean. We did guar next. And then we did next one. We did cowpea. And then we did sun hemp. And then we did pigeon pea. Then here's the results of that plot. Now take in mind our 10-year average is 187. So here when we did this, here's some of the results we're getting. We even had fava bean. We used them wrong because they died out. And a lot of the cool season plants, when our corn gets very tall, late summer, the cool season stuff dies out. The warm season continued on. But we started to see some with only a quarter rate of nitrogen. We're getting some way above average yields on some of these. The 3 sisters, that we had corn, we had cowpeas, and we had a squash in there. Kind of like the old Indian thing. But here we're getting some excellent yields up here. This last half from the check on down did not have the cool season mix in with it. They were just the straight warm season in there. So even though that died out, that cool season stuff got up about that big and died out, I thought, oh, failure. This chart is telling me different, that by having that cool season mix, and even though it dies, it got up there, those roots did something or gathered some other nutrients. So doing the combination of this, and so next year going forward, I'm going to pick out some of my top warm season ones, blend them together along with some cool season, and interplant into this. Okay. Yeah, this is a picture of the three sisters. Because right there you see some of the squash, and then you got these cowpeas that just vine out all over. And one thing, you know, we aren't grazing this, and come a frost, the cowpeas, any of the warm season, they just totally disintegrate. But we've measured the above ground biomass and how much nitrogen we have there. And on a given year, it's from 20 to 40 units of nitrogen that produces in there. And we're still maintaining, if not increasing, our yield. So what I'm doing there is I'm feeding the biology. And so with the higher, the big carbon crop of corn, it's breaking down our residue quicker and getting the nutrient cycling a lot quicker into the soil. And here it shows, you know, we're harvesting it. Shows some of the cowpeas will vine up there. I evaluated like over 50 varieties of cowpeas. And there are some that you do not want to plant, because we had some that vine clear to the top and just looked, it was swarmed over the corn. We still harvest it, but it was just, but when I told that problem, there were some guys that graze corn, put a grazing corn out there, and they wanted to plant cowpeas, that type of cowpea that went all the vined up to the top. So there's a different use for it. Okay. And that's what it looks like in the summertime. And when I go in there in August, when we're very hot and very humid, it makes a microclimate in there. And it stays cool. And normally, you know, it's very hot, and during the finishing of the corn, if we can keep that cool there, that's where it's keeping disease down, and it just makes a nice microclimate. When we get the rain, we don't get the evaporation off that. Next. Yeah, and this is what just really looks nice, you know, come in the fall when we go and harvest. We have a few going up the stalks, but not too many. And that's what it kind of looks like when you harvest. Then we've got the green in between the rows. Then the next. Okay, next one. And we want to utilize this whole year, even though we're froze up in the wintertime, we want to have a continual live plant roots, you know, all year round as possible. And the next slide. The power of the plant exudates, the root tips and how they release things. If you're aware on your traditional soil test, when they measure your phosphorus or some of the other chemistry, do you realize what they're using to get that test? A lot of times they're using hydrochloric acid to extract that off your soil to tell you what you have available. In nature and in your fields, do you apply hydrochloric acid? If you did, you know, you'd kill it. So a lot of these, the root tips, and that's where the Haney test you've probably heard about, he uses root tip exudates, water-soluble exudates that help release some of the nutrients that are locked into our soils. And by using these different plants and start to understand the plant communities, this is so powerful, and it also fixes carbon. You had Dr. Jones here last year. She talks about the liquid carbon pathway. This is it, you know, putting that carbon into the ground. And also releasing these other nutrients. So it's building our soils back up. Next. This is a field day. How many of you have seen this actual? It's called the Slake Test. How many have seen this? Okay, very few. What this is is you take 2 beakers of water. You have a little screen in the top here. And so you take a clod of soil. This is my farm here, this. This was the neighboring field. The neighboring field is 20 years of no-till. And mine's about 24 years of no-till. But also I've had cover crops. And with that PED, you have them totally dry. And then you set those in the beakers. And then just let the water rush in. There's no disturbance on it. And I wish I had the video of it. This one over here, it just starts exploding and slaking off. The water's rushing into there. There's no soil glues, the glomalins, and with the plant roots, there's no glue, and it just all falls apart. And that's with no disturbance. So that's what happens when we go and the rainfall hits. Da-da-da. And anyway, what that does, and I've done an experiment, I did it in front of some international agronomists in that Slake Test, to where they both put them in, and one time one of them didn't really fall apart. It started to turn chocolatey. But anyway, then I had one of the agronomists take her finger and touch it. Well, she touched mine, and it was like a sponge. It kind of just springed up, and it didn't fall apart. This one clod that was kind of a little resistant, she barely touched it, and then it just blew apart. So that's having stable soils so we don't lose our nutrients. And then this is kind of go back. There we go. By having those roots in there most of the year and to have real healthy soils, we've got roots going way down deep. This is, after a cereal crop, and even if we terminate early, for some of the beginners into the Midwest, we always tell them, go ahead and terminate early. Don't go into the big stuff at the first. Like I say, you need to be drinking the whiskey first there. But here, these roots go down 30, 40 inches with only about 6, 7 inches of growth above that. Now, by not disturbing our soil, and we've got the mulch over the top, we've got these earthworm channels going down and they're bringing some of the top residue down into the soil. We're changing our soils. We've got these pathways down here. And so our topsoil, instead of being washed away and used up, we're starting to build back the carbon and build our topsoils back up. These are our natural tillers and stuff, and to incorporate the residue in there. And it also makes water infiltration. We can take a 3-4 inch rainfall event and get most of that water into the soil profile. Then we have real healthy soils here. And here you can see some fungal threads. And under the microscope we've looked, and we've seen the mycorrhizal spores and the threads under there. So we have very healthy plants. Okay. Next. Yeah, this is that show. When I talked about those lateral roots and the nodulation of the soybean plant, that's clear out 15 inches away from the soybean plant, about an inch under the ground. We've got all this nodulation going on there. So a real healthy system. Next. And then the last one is livestock integration. This isn't my cow herd, but they're trying to keep them tight and mob graze. And like I say, when we emulate nature, we're going back to where our prairie soils, what was the natural thing that worked across the prairies? It was the buffalo. And they stayed there were predators around them and kept them tight. And so then they mob grazed. And so the manure and the urine was all tightly spaced. They'd graze across it, but then they wouldn't come back there for a long period of time. So long periods of rest in between that. So that's what, if you bring in livestock, try to mob graze or rotate through it. And not take, if you have a cover crop that you're grazing, you only want to take 40, 50% of it and have the rest trampled down by heavy stocking rate. Everybody goes, that's a waste of grazing. No, you're building your soils. So a different mindset. And here's a friend of mine. He's taking some rough ground, and he's doing, mob ground. He's doing 2 different species in there. He's got the sheep, and he's got cattle in there too. And that's just on pasture ground. And the story behind this is some rough ground, and it's always been in pasture, and mainly it was 1 or 2 species of grass. When he started mob grazing this, now he's up to 40, 50 different species that came back from the ground. The seed was dormant for years and years. And he'd been spraying before and taking out all the different weeds, but now all the prairie plants and things start to come back. And the cattle and sheep, he doesn't have to use insecticides, and some of the minerals, he's cut down on the minerals because the plants are accessing that. The different plants are doing that. Next. And this is a soil food web, and when I'm talking about the livestock that now I have to take care of, it's the below ground that I'm really have to pay attention to. So if we don't pay attention to this, we don't have the whole cycling of the whole system. When we don't pay attention to the bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes. And there are more beneficial nematodes than harmful ones. So we've missed out on this. We've kind of forgot about this. And in this whole system, what is the greatest factor here? It's taking sunshine. In the simplest system, for green plants, we're taking CO2 out of the air, converting it into carbon and sequestering carbon into the ground. That's why plants can do a lot of this work for us. We overcomplicate things. And then we have the underground livestock. There's just a nice, healthy earthworm that we have on our farm. Next. And here is some of the earthworm channels going on down. And if you see, we have some roots. And those roots, they'll just keep going on down. And, well, here, this is probably about 3 feet down. That's a soybean root, falling that channel on down. And you've got all this, the dark carbon there, which is some really rich material there. So they're accessing that stored up carbon down deeper in the profile. Next. Then I got a microscope and started looking. And not only the roots going down here, then we started looking at what livestock do I have. I used to have livestock. Now it's the underground livestock. So I get out the microscope, and I've taken a little classes on it, how to utilize that. Now I have the next. And this is the abundance of soil organisms. And the biomass, the amount of pounds per acre on a 6-inch depth, earthworms. And when you look at the fungi, how many pounds per acre. So this is just amazing how much livestock I've got underground. So now that I don't have the above ground livestock that I had to feed, I really have to focus on, if I want a healthy population, I really need to feed this. And it's fed by plants and these other different plant species. Okay, next. Yeah, here's a shot of that. And if I had it in video, this thing was busy when I first looked at this. All those smaller black dots are bacteria, and then the larger ones are protozoa. And we also saw some mycorrhizal spores and some beneficial nematodes. But this thing was just busy crazy. So I've got a lot of livestock now to take care of. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris, for this nice talk about the subsoil richness we have.
Yes.
If we just knew about it.
Yeah.
But sometimes we knew before and even now.
Yes.
So what I liked especially at your talk is when you gave the hint on the interdependencies of all the factors. And you told me before environmental and wallet-friendly fertilization is logical once you know how the soil biome works. So
yes.
That's what I liked most at your talk, but I think others also have got something to say to your talk. Who wants to add something, question something, or reflect on some thoughts Chris presented to us? Yes, please.
Yes, hello. You told that when you seed your cover crops and afterwards you plant your soy or corn, that you determine the cover crop before or after. Could you observe or can you tell us how much, what kind of glyphosate or herbicide you use and how much did you need less after you implemented your system?
Right. Okay, so herbicide use and termination of my corn, or the cover crops going into corn. And you don't start reducing these. You know, it's like the one chart where the previous presenter showed the glyphosate use going down. One thing that we're doing, we're rotating, and sometimes when we're using like atrazine or some other grass herbicide, we'll use paraquat as a burn down. That way it's another rotation, so we aren't going to hammer that with glyphosate. So we'll use that. Some of the things we're trying is to have a winter-killed cover crop, to where we have a mat, you know, and that would be like the oats and barley, and we're trying to get some other species in there so they winter kill, so we wouldn't have to do a termination that way. So we're slowly going at it and reducing those, but always use other tools in the toolbox, you know. And we terminate that, if we have cereal rye out there, we're terminating when it's still very vegetative, so early. I really like maximum carbon, but the maximum carbon works better, or the bigger cover crop ahead of soybeans. Ahead of corn, you have to be very careful. And I've had some big mistakes, you know, where we planted into corn into a cover crop like that. Well, then it turned rainy, and it kept growing. The corn started coming up. It started to immobilize some of our nitrogen and tie that up. And when we came and finally sprayed, we put a little nitrogen over the top also, besides our deep band and our side band with the planter applied. Then what we sprayed over the top, because the cover crop got bigger, got tied up the C to N ratio of breaking that down. That nitrogen did not go to my corn crop. It went to breaking down the system. So I messed up there. It cost me 30, 40 bushel per acre, you know, big time. And so taking things slow ahead of corn, I always recommend, you know, going smaller, unless you have it really to where you can apply nitrogen with the planter and have a higher rate with the planter at the right time. And like the friend from North Carolina, and I've got some friends that are doing this, if you have manure in the system, planting corn into bigger covers really works. Otherwise, you have to really pay attention to your nitrogen management, because you can get some tie-up. So we try to err on to terminate early. That way we can keep rates low. But like I say, sometimes glyphosate, but a lot of times paraquat, because like paraquat really heats up and works with some of the other chemistry that we put together. If you put some of those grass herbicides with glyphosate, they fight. They're antagonistic. So they kind of fight each other. So I hope that helps.
Right. Some other questions on this topic? So there's a question just in the middle.
Hello. You said that you lock the moisture in hotter seasons beneath the cover crops. And have you ever experienced any problems with fungus infestation?
With insects?
No, with fungus.
With fungus?
Mm-hmm.
No, I have not. When we're keeping more of that cover, and when I have the biological activity going in there, it reduces some of those pathogens. We used to, when you're just straight no-tilling, we had fungus issues in the corn, and we would apply fungicide late. Now that I've got my soils healthier, we've eliminated fungicide, eliminated insecticide from that system. But it's getting the system going and understanding how it really functions. And that thick mat of residue that we rolled down in the soybeans, by fall it was like this. It had been digested and put back into the system. So you have to have a very good system working. Then we don't have those issues. And it gets better and better. The healthier system we have, then we don't have to use the fungicides or the insecticides.
So it's like a health cycle you were formulating.
Yeah. Basically, if you understand kind of the human biome, we have so much biology in us. A lot of times if you take a regimen of antibiotic, then, and just now I'm starting to hear doctors start to recommend, some probiotics once you're off of that to get back healthy, get a healthy gut back again. Livestock people have known this for a long time. If you have a sick animal, treated them with antibiotic, it kills a lot of the flora. They got healthy again from whatever they had ailment. But then you have to get probiotics back in there to get the system started again. And we have a system in our soils because we've hit it with fungicides and a lot of pesticides that it's very dormant. So you have to be cautious going forward how we proceed, but understanding how do I get biology back in there. Whether it's livestock or compost tea, some extracts, that's kind of the next thing I'm really working on since I don't have above ground livestock to really ramp this up. Or how can I help other people that have a dormant system? How can we jumpstart that and get them going? And that's kind of some of my next goals.
Yeah, so you feed the animals in your soil and you take care about when to use which tool and not always using the hammer.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, is there some more? Yeah, please.
So, mein Englisch ist nicht so gut. Vielleicht können Sie es übersetzen. Ne?
Ja,
Was macht er gegen Feldmäuse, gegen Maiszünsler und gegen Maiswurzelbohrer?
So, what are you actually doing against mice, like small rodents, and all the other contexts of insects in mice, like these boring holes things?
When you have a healthier crop, some of the pest pressure goes away. On the real tall rye, we did an experiment that, to where we've rolled it down, and when we roll it down flat, we don't have the issues with mice. If we leave it and let it fall down on its own after it's, we terminate it, then you'll have mice. And the problem is when you have the raptors or the birds that normally come and try to find those, or even the foxes or the coyotes that will capture those mice, if it's all up like this, the mice can hide a lot more. So if it's laid down flat, then the predators can do their job. And so we don't have the issues with the mice. Going back to the corn and some of the mistakes when I got to bigger, greener crops and where it got away from me and the corn was grown up, then when the flights of moths came in, we had armyworm come in. And so that's where I backed away on the height of the, terminating the residue. And so we've had some, issue with insects, coming in. So it's always a learning curve. And I always say, we have a plan all laid out, and it's like, okay, this is all going to work, but Mother Nature doesn't read your plan. Every year she throws something at you. And if you can adapt and change, and that's what we're doing, None of this is perfect, but we're seeing so many more benefits, and reduction of pests and pesticides that, we're going forward with it.
Also die Räuber, die haben die Mäuse dann im Griff. The predators go for the mice, and then you've got no problem with it.
Right.
Yeah. So, more questions? No more questions? Last chance. Okay, so thank you very much, Chris, for visiting us. I heard your colleague is giving a talk tomorrow in France.
Yes.
Lauren. Yeah, so if somebody is in France tomorrow at our partner association, ECAF.
Yes.
So, yes, maybe we know more about it some other time. And thank you very much, Chris, for coming here.
You bet. You bet.
We also got something for you.